Hello, this webinar is provided by uscivicstraining.org, George Washington's Farewell Address, Constitution Day, 1796. And this is part 2, where the main theme is cherishing the Constitution. And I'll mention as we begin to get into these continuing parts, there'll be a lot of quotations from George Washington's Farewell Address and less graphics than normal, but the specific words that Washington uses are so compelling we've got to display and look at the text carefully. As we begin to move to the next section of George Washington's Farewell Address, we begin paragraph 9 with the summary statement after some deep reflection. And this is what Washington says there. My hope is to offer you solemn contemplation and to recommend to your frequent review some sentiments which are the result of much reflection, of no inconsiderable observation, which means after some deep observation, and which appear to me all important to the permanency of your felicity as a people. So again, Washington, who served our country for over 40 years as Commander-in-Chief, as President of the Constitutional Convention, and then as first President, is in this farewell address trying to emphasize the things that he has experienced and he knows deeply because of his 40 years plus of helping found this new government and this society in the new United States of America. And so these words we should view as weighty. So the first thing he wants us to do is to cherish the Constitution. He says this: for the Constitution is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. So as I've mentioned before, the Declaration of Independence actually is kind of the philosophy document of the principles on which the United States is founded. But then, as Washington is saying here, the Constitution is really the structure that makes that independence real, because it is the structure with which our government takes form to put into practice the principles of the Declaration of Independence. The next part of paragraph 9, Washington says this, and I've added underlining because there's so many valuable gems here that need to be lifted out. He says this: it is of infinite moment, which means essential. It is essential that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it. In other words, you should cherish the Constitution and find yourself attached to it and regularly reviewing it and understanding it, accustoming yourselves to think and speak of it as the palladium, that is, means sacred object of your political safety and prosperity, and then watching for its preservation with jealous anxiety, that you ought to defend the Constitution and be knowledgeable of its content so that you could defend the Constitution like a mother grizzly bear would defend her cubs. Let's take a further look at this word palladium and see what he means here by using it in the context of his farewell address. A palladium is a safeguard viewed as a guarantee of the integrity of social institutions. It also can mean a sacred object that was believed to have the power to preserve a city or state possessing it. And so he uses this word that we're not familiar with in this day and age because we are not well studied on these topics in this current era. And so it's pretty amazing, and it says a lot about the citizens of that day that they would have known and understood this word. And by using that word, he's saying that the Constitution is just central to preserving our freedom and liberty, and preserving its integrity is germane to that. Then he finishes off this paragraph 9 with some additional emphases. He says, discountenancing whatever may suggest even a suspicion that it can be, in any event, be abandoned. So he said, don't even entertain the idea that the Constitution is not of consequence and it can just be shoved aside and abandoned. And indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest. And so he begins to kind of introduce this idea of creating factions and discord and pitting people groups against one another in order to gain control and power in our country. And then fourthly, working against any attempts to enfeeble the ties between various parts of the country. He also transitions in paragraph 9 to talk about attacks on the Constitution and where those will come from. And boy, was he prophetic in his utterance of these words. He says this, "From different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken, and many artifices employed." Well, what's this word artifices mean? Well, let's take a look at some of the definitions of artifices. Artifices means an artful, crafty, covert means to obtain an improper end by using deception and trickery. Means using underhanded and cunning schemes to undermine in order to achieve an immoral goal. Base, immoral. And so what he's saying here is the Constitution will be attacked, and there'll be people that will take a lot of pains to do that, to undermine it, to position the Constitution as relevant, or to try and interpret it to their own ends, and that these people will be artful, crafty, they'll be covert. They'll use deception and trickery. They'll use language and words to deceive what they're up to. They'll use processes that are underhanded and cunning, any scheme that they can to achieve and gain power and diminish the Constitution's ability to provide checks and balances on their desire to have power and control. And so he names where these attacks come from. He says that these attempts will be to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth. And what he's referring to here is he's referring back to the paragraph on the Palladium, that the truth that the Constitution is your Palladium, the sacred object of your political safety and prosperity. And so what he's saying here is this undermining will seek to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth that the Constitution is irrelevant. And this has been particularly successful in that those that are 25 to 30 years old in this day and age, actually in their 20s, 50% of that population believe that the founding documents are no longer relevant to the governance of the United States of America. You can see those statistics presented in the civic ignorance video at this site. And so these attacks will desire to weaken in your minds that truth. As this is the point, that is this truth in your political fortress. So again, the Palladium is the political fortress against which the batteries of internal and external enemies will be most constantly and active, though often covertly and insidiously directed. And so he goes on to say that this will be constant, and the enemies of the Constitution will be constantly and actively, underhandedly and cunningly and schemingly trying to undermine it. He then transitions in this paragraph back to the idea of who we are as Americans, and he has just some few brief remarks here in paragraph 10. He says, "You are citizens by birth or choice of a common country, and that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of America must always exalt the just pride of patriotism." Well, again, in this day and age, political leaders seek to divide people against one another in order to achieve and attain and retain political power. Washington is saying that at the end of the day, we are to not be that way, but we're to have a common identity of freedom and liberty-loving people, no matter our nationality, race, or heritage, and that we should apply not the name hyphenated American, but that American would be our greatest expression and pride of patriotism. Then, as we flow through this farewell address, we come to paragraphs 11 through 15, which most scholars tend to focus in on today. It's a large section, and it deals with regional factions. And this is where today's scholars tend to focus their study. Then they pay little attention to the timeless principles throughout the rest of the address. And you've already seen some of those timeless principles already, which I'm sure for most listeners is a huge wake-up and they listened to it with disbelief that those things were actually said. But let me summarize just in sentence form what paragraph 11 through 15 highlights so you can continue to get a flow for this farewell address. In paragraph 11, that North and South, East and West, each part of the country benefits each other. Paragraph 12, North and South, East and West, united together, have greater strength and security. Paragraph 13, that the state, county, and local governments govern closely to the affairs of the people, while the federal government serves to connect the whole. And so he had a proper understanding of the high value and the preeminence of state, county, and local governments over the federal government, and the role of the federal government was simply to connect the whole, not to lord over the nation and lord over the states. He continues, designing men will seek to disturb the Union by misrepresenting the opinions of others and fostering jealousies. So again, he gets back to this nature of man and what people will do to undermine the civic governing process. For the efficacy and permanency of the nation, a federal constitution is indispensable and is superior to having simple alliances. And then he concludes this in paragraph 15 by saying the federal constitution that the people have chosen, along with the federation of state, county, and local governments, provides maximum stability, security, and liberty, and should be upheld and respected. And so that's a summary of those paragraphs in narrative form. And if you get the printable PDF at uscivicstraining.org, you can read those paragraphs in total. So then as we begin to wrap up this part 2, in this part of the farewell address, Washington concludes his thoughts, again bringing us back to the beauty of the Constitution. And here we're looking at paragraph 16. We've flowed this far. This government, the offspring of your own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted upon full investigation and mature deliberation. And what he's saying here basically is that the people at the Constitutional Convention just didn't get carried away thinking they had come up with something great, but it really took a lot of work. It was thought out, and that the deliberation was done with thoughtfulness and a great degree of maturity. That this government is completely free in its principles, in the distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy, and containing within itself a provision for its own amendment. So in this vein, the Constitution actually is a living Constitution from the standpoint that there are provisions, there's a natural process through amendments and ratifications that the Constitution can be amended. Many that want to undermine the Constitution and its principles today want to try and contrast their vision of a living Constitution. When they desire to call the Constitution a living Constitution, what they mean is only current judges that live in this era are mature enough and wise enough to take ideas from the Constitution and then make their own interpretations out of it. Thusly, judges become oligarchs and actually placing their opinions above what the Constitution says and ignoring what the Constitution says. So in fact, the Constitution actually is a living document, but not in how they mean it, but in the process or by the processes of it being able to be amended and adjusted for new realities that future citizens would face. So as Washington finishes up paragraph 16, he says this: the Constitution has a just claim to your confidence and your support, respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures, our duties enjoined by the fundamental maxims of liberty. The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. And so this finishes part 2 of walking through George Washington's farewell address. In fact, his Constitution address on Constitution Day, September 17th, 1796. Again, for PDF copy of these presentations or a PDF copy of George Washington's farewell address, see uscivicstraining.org. My name's Craig Seibert. Thank you for listening.